and welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's show is an exclusive and brand new story on Amazon Bookstore by the incredibly talented Jack LaFontaine that's set to make your skin crawl and chills up and down your spine. I guarantee you that. As ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag Team Fear? And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story, entitled Bayou Moon. Chapter 1. Let's get straight into that. The lights at 439 Pierre Street came on earlier than they did anywhere else in Loquet. Its lone resident, Delmar Rousseau, was habitually awake before the 3:30 alarm and on his way to work by 4. This morning was no exception. Running a hand through his salt and pepper hair, Delmar shuffled off to the bathroom. His hair was getting saltier every day, and tiny crow feet had stamped into the corners of his eyes, where the only sign of his face yielded to age. He shivered a little as he splashed handfuls of cold water onto his face, scrubbing it dry on the towel hanging next to the mirror. That done, he flashed a quick smile and returned to his room, scratching a place he reserved for private moments. He pulled a white baker's coat from a row of them hanging in the closet, slipped his arms through the sleeves, and buttoned it over a bright white shirt before pulling on starched overalls. Then, balancing a black cap with a gold fleur-de-lis on the front of it atop of his head, he headed for the door. A wide-haired terrier jumped from the bed and chased after him, and Delmar stopped in a doorway to scratch behind the little dog's ear. You be a good boy, Pepe," Delmar told the bouncing bundle of energy at his feet. Pepe ignored him and began to run laps around his master in a playful attempt to keep him home, and Delmar carefully stutter-stepped around the dog but kept up a steady march for the front door. They were still a few feet from their destination when Pepe froze in his tracks, his eyes locked onto the door. The hair on the little dog's neck stood on end, his lips curled back from his tiny, sharp teeth, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. "Ho, what are you here?" Delmar asked with a chuckle. "There a monster out there, boy? You gonna get him?" Pepe continued to growl. The dog's abrupt departure from his usual playfulness had Delmar spooked. He mimicked the dog's tilted head, listening for something, anything that might tell him what had the dog so frightened. A shiver washed over him. Goose flesh stood on his arms. The skin on the back of his neck began to crawl, but he heard nothing except the wind outside. Sliding one foot silently in front of the other, he inched forward, and Pepe followed, keeping his body glued to his master's right leg. Delmar could feel the dogs trembling beside him. His hand shook as he reached for the door. A second before making contact, the knob moved. He snatched his hand back. Unmoving and barely breathing, he stared at the door, waiting for the knob to move again. "What the hell is this nonsense?" his quivering lips said. "That door don't move." He rubbed his palms together to warm them. The chill he felt turned to ice. There was no denying it this time. The unlocked door rattled on its hinges, and the knob shook on its own accord. Delmar retreated on tiptoes, and Pepe's bladder had let go, and wet boot prints followed Delmar's track across the room. Trying hard to hold on to his own bladder, he reached deep into the space between the cushion and the arm of his chair. He pulled out an old Colt revolver his daddy had left him. The click of the hammer sounded like limbs snapping. He swallowed hard, raised the weapon, and crept back to the door. His hand reached for the latch once more and again drew back suddenly. He decided on a new strategy. "I got a gun, by God," he warned. "You hear me? I'll shoot your ass." His own heavy breathing was the only reply, hoping against hope that whoever was out there got the message. He drew back to the living room curtain with the muzzle of the Colt and flipped on the porch light. The wide porch was empty, but he couldn't see the area immediately in front of the door. "Ah, hell, you got the gun," he thought. "You going to work or you gonna hide?" Work won out. His hand closed around the knob and slowly he turned it. And shaking his head, Delmar pulled the door towards him. It creaked open on rusted hinges, allowing a thread of lingering moonlight to fall across the tops of his boots as he inched the door open a bit further. Pepe shot between his legs and through the open door before Delmar could move. The dog let out a high-pitched yelp and Delmar yanked open the door. "Pepe, you!" The words stuck in his throat. Delmar's eyes filled his face. He desperately wanted to scream. A strangled, squeaking sound was all that escaped his throat. A hand closed over his face, and long claws dug into the flesh of his neck. Across town, Sheriff Ed Landry was jarred from asleep by the tiny notes of what passed these days for a ringing tone. As he reached for it, he reminded himself, again, to ask somebody to change the damn thing. He found the phone on the second try. "Landry," he mumbled into it. "Sheriff," Jerry Wills said in his car. "I need you down at Delmar Rousseau's house, right now. Delmar's been killed." "What the? Never mind. Tell me when I get there. I'm on my way," Landry said. "Did you keep it off the scanner? No lights and sirens?" "I'm afraid not," Jerry said. "I've already got company." "Damn. Well, can't be helped. Call Doc Johnson," Landry ordered, glancing at the clock. "And for God's sake, keep it as quiet as possible." Jerry Wills was Landry's unofficial chief deputy. He was on the force before Landry's election as sheriff 5 years before. Jerry had the makings of a good sheriff even back then. Motivation, not skills, had been the deciding factor in him not running for the office. Landry counted it as his good fortune that neither did Jerry have an interest in the jobs offered to him by bigger cities. Like Landry, he was born and raised in Locquette. The draft was over by the time Jerry graduated from Locquette High. He worked a brief stint as a convenience store clerk before enlisting in the army. He served his time and returned to Locquette, where he applied for a job as a deputy and was hired by Landry's predecessor. He had been with the department ever since. Jerry was senior enough not to have to work the night shift. However, he was a night owl by nature and did so by choice, much to the joy of the less senior deputies. Murder in tiny Locquette was unheard of, but big stuff going on down during the last hour of the night shift was a regular fare. In less than 10 minutes, Landry clapped his Stetson on his head as he was rushing out the door. As he rolled up to the curb in front of the 439 Pierre Street, Jerry was standing at the gate of Delmar's picket fence, which he had just finished decorating with yellow tape. He nosed his cruiser in grill to grill with a deputy's car. He reached for his hat, pushed the door open with his foot, and climbed out. Landry pulled the brim of his hat low onto his brow and stood glaring over the roof of his cruiser at the crowd gathered across the street. Cursing beneath his breath, he waved Jerry over to meet him in the space between the units. Landry's face remained impassive through Jerry's animated, though unnecessary, apology for calling his boss out at this ungodly hour. As he was speaking, a hand tugged at Landry's elbow. He swatted it away without a glance. Vera Thibodeau, Delmar's next-door neighbour, squawked and cursed. "Miss Vera," Jerry scolded, "what if your mama heard you talk like that?" "My mama is 83 years old and deaf as a post," she shot back. "You just mind your manner, Jerry Wills." "And she's right next door, Miss Vera," Landry added. Shouldn't you go see about her? Vera ignored his advice, and she continued to grumble about the nerve of some people as she wandered away to rejoin the crowd of a dozen or so gathered across the street. Landry turned his attention to Delmar's blood-covered porch and the two, equally, bloody steps leading up to it. Boots and the legs of a pair of overalls he assumed belonged to Delmar Rousseau were all that were visible from the street. He glanced up at his deputy's boots and back at the porch where a bloody set of footprints led away from the house. Seeing the clean boots on Jerry's feet brought a sigh of relief. Jerry knew better than to walk all over the crime scene. But when you haven't had a murder in years, mistakes can happen. Now, did you look inside? Landry asked. Yeah, no one's there but Delmar, Jerry answered. How did you get in? And the back door was unlocked. No sign of forced entry. Okay, well, let's have a look. Landry pointed for Jerry to lead the way around back. Who carted in? Landry asked. Maury, Jerry said. He says those are his bloody footprints out front. He's in my car. Seems that when Delmar didn't show up by 5, Maury got worried. He's the one that carted in. He didn't realize he'd been standing in blood until I pointed it out to him and asked about the prints. Maury was Maurice Fontaine, Delmar's employer and owner of the Bayou Cafe. Delmar hadn't missed a day of work in 22 years. His steadfast service at the cafe was the confirmed source of 3 flu outbreaks and the launching pad for the annual summer cold season in Bonaire Parish. And it was the first time in 2 decades he had arrived to find the cafe dark. And when he found the door locked and the safe intact too, he grew concerned for Delmar and went looking for him. Landry nodded and followed the deputy. The crime scene just outside the back door wasn't as pristine as it first appeared. Landry stepped over a large puddle of Jerry's breakfast near the gate. His own stomach rolled over at the sight of the pool of undigested biscuits and gravy in the backyard. Damn, boy, you ate one hell of a breakfast, Landry said. That's all right, that stuff from the stack and go ain't worth keeping anyway. Jerry groaned and laid a hand on his lurching stomach, causing Landry to take a step back. That's okay, Sheriff, Jerry said with a weak smile. There's nothing left. Landry wasn't entirely convinced, and to his thinking, Jerry still looked green around the edges. He followed the deputy up the back steps and through the door into a tiny mudroom, where a yellow slicker hung from the nail above a pair of boots tucked neatly under a small blue bench. The floor in Delmar's mudroom reminded Landry of the one in his grandmother's house, and hers was covered with the same hideous brown and yellow linoleum that Landry hated. The floor was ugly as sin, but it looked clean. There was no blood or dirt to be seen, and no footprints. As Jerry said, there were no signs on the door of forced entry. The wretched vinyl flooring continued from the entry through a narrow doorway into a spotless Galais-style kitchen. The modern stainless steel appliances looked out of place against the country blue and white of the worn cabinets and walls. A print sofa in the same blue and dusty rose was visible in the living room beyond. Delmar evidently took his home cooking as seriously as his professional efforts. His home decor? Not so much. The countertops lining the kitchen were crowded with rows of sparkling chrome mixers, blenders and gadgets that did things Landry couldn't imagine. Across the room, grey light seeped in through a partially open curtain. The air was heavy with a salty copper smell of blood that covered the door, walls and floor. And Delmar Rousseau's bloody corpse was sprawled in the doorway. On the exterior side of the doorway, the front porch was splattered with the same blood that pooled beneath Delmar's body. What do you make of that? Landry asked, pointing at the door. And Jerry pushed his Stetson back and scratched his head. The door was open and Delmar right there when it happened. Damn right it was, Landry said. I'd say whoever did this must have killed him right there in the doorway. Maybe we'll get lucky and find some prints besides Delmar's on the back side of that door. Did Doc Johnson give you an ETA? "I should be here in the next 30 minutes, Jerry said. "The CSI ought to be right behind him." "Okay, well, since the crowd has gathered, go ahead and have dispatch call a couple of deputies in to keep them back while the CSI is at work." "Sure thing. Already in the work, Sheriff." "I don't see any damage to the door," Landry told him. "I guess Delmar either let them in or at least opened the door for them," and Jerry nodded in agreement. "Sheriff," Jerry said, "any guess as to where we might find his head?" Jasmine Ledoux was what passed for the crime scene investigation unit for Bonaire Parish. She was a graduate of Southern University with a master's in criminal justice and a speciality in evidence collection. While she worked for the Morgan City Police Department, she was designated as an investigator for the tiny Bonaire Parish. And she had never actually worked a case in the parish, and Landry had met her only twice at area conferences. Landry was standing in Delmar's front yard when he saw one of his deputies let a fire-red Porsche Panamera pass inside the barricade. "This should be interesting," he told himself. As impressive as the car was the black woman that slipped from it. She withdrew a large case from her car and started walking Landry's way. And she was dressed in a simple, sleeveless white tee, loose-fitting black pants that reminded him of hospital scrubs and sneakers. She walked with her shoulders back, head erect with an unwavering gaze. Her bare arms were witness to time spent in some gym. Her stride was measured and confident. "Miss Ledoux?" He greeted her with a smile and outstretched hand. "Sheriff Landry," and she shook his hand. "We meet at last, officially, that is." "I suppose it had to happen sooner or later," he replied. "Welcome to Bonaire Parish. I appreciate you coming so quickly. We're here to give you whatever support you need. You have only to ask." How about a quick look at the body then? I'll get set up." "Sure thing. Follow me," he said with a wave of his hands and started around the house. "We have kept clear of the front entrance where the body is and been using the back door. I'll let you decide where it's clear for us to use the front." She stopped suddenly in the middle of the yard and stared at him. Landry went a few steps before he realized she was no longer with him. "Something wrong?" He turned and asked. "Wrong? No," she said. "Shocked is more like it." "Shocked? You see this stuff all the time." "No, not the scene," she said, smiling at him. "Courtesy, manners, unasked for cooperation and deference to my judgment. I'm a bit overwhelmed by it all. Honestly, I was all set for a battle with you." "Miss Ledoux," Landry's smile grew wide. "You are the expert here. We haven't met before now because, well, Lockett is one of those places where this kind of thing just doesn't happen. Only now it has. And we're counting on your work to help us make our case. And there's a bad guy to catch in there. Certainty is no call to fight about it." "Thank you, Sheriff," she said with a smile. "Your attitude is refreshing, to say the least. Tell you what, my friends call me Jazz. Let's be friends." You got it. Welcome, Jazz, to Lockett," he said and swept his hands towards the living room. "Your crime scene." "Well," Jazz said, "when you folks do it, y'all do it up big time." "Sheriff," a voice said from behind him in the kitchen. "I found his head." Bayou Moon. Chapter 2. Let's get straight into that. Much to Landry's chagrin, he stepped from the white clapboard on Pierce Street to find an army of news vans parked at both ends of the block, and their passengers had shouldered aside the crowd across the street, and he waved his deputies over to him. "I shouldn't have to say this," he began, "but but just so we are all clear, not a word to those vultures across the street. Everybody got that?" Nods and murmurs of agreement greeted his announcement. "I'll leave them to me." Doc Johnson stepped up to lay a hand on Landry's shoulder. Dr. Jefferson Johnson was the medical examiner for Bonaire Parish. He'd held the office for so long, most folks around the parish were persuaded he either was born on the job or, like Athena, sprang fully formed from his predecessor's forehead. His shaggy white mane seemed to have a mind of its own. Hair flew in all directions in a halo about his round face. His bright blue eyes sparkled with lively intelligence. His stooped shoulders and the slight hitch in his step slowed him, only slightly. The man lived life unbowed to age. "All done here, Ed," he said as the stretcher carrying the black bag-wrapped body of Delmar Rousseau passed on the way to Chet Rawlins' hearse, which doubled as a coroner's van. "Anything I can feed the crowd over yonder?" Ed asked. "I died around 3 or 4, Johnson said. "Gotta be a homicide. He didn't leave his head in the cupboard on his own." "A message?" Landry agreed with a nod of his head. "I'd say so. Any idea as to the sender?" "Not a clue. No pun intended." Doc Johnson gave him a quick nod and followed the body to the waiting hearse and a ride to Rawlins' funeral home. "Who's coming along for the autopsy?" "Jerry got the short straw," Landry said. "I'll get him moving that way." Good enough." By noon, the news crews were making their way through the town, putting together stories for the nightly news. There was little to film, and his officers had followed his orders to remain tight-lipped. And that didn't seem to matter to the press. They shoved microphones in the face of anyone who would stand still long enough for it in the hopes that something sensational or utterly stupid popped out of their mouth. Some of the reporters brought coffee and donuts at the Bayou Cafe for those who cared to speculate on camera about the overnight events. Maurice gave interviews until the media circus packed up around 3 o'clock. The story hit the television network news a few hours later. Instant local celebrity and accorded those who appeared on camera with the tales of shock and awe. Babalu San, shirtless under his half-button-up ovals, provided the obligatory "What a bunch of hicks" shot savoured by city audiences. Alex James played the role of tattooed redneck for the cameras. However, the biggest sensation by far was ancient John St. Pierre, Old John, as he was known around the town, claimed to be the oldest living person in the parish. It wasn't a for certain fact, but no one cared to dispute the story. The camera not only added £10, which Old John could use, it also added at least 50 years to his face. He looked like death had warmed him over at least twice. "I was a rougarou," John told the camera. "A rougarou?" Shelley Martin from Channel 12 feigned in ignorance. "What's a rougarou, Mr. St. Pierre? Tell us about that." And John smiled at the camera and launched into a 30-minute tale of curses, myth and gruesome legend, revered by Cajuns and cryptozoologists alike. Landry, unseen by Shelley Martin or her crew, witnessed the interview from a distance, cursing Old John all the while. That kind of talk was just the kind of thing that would bring a host of monster hunters down in the middle of his investigation. Old John concluded the interview with the belief Delmar was the target due to his long-standing disregard for Lent. Landry considered it an honest-to-God miracle that John's views on Delmar and Lent were the only details to reach the air. Landry caught up with Detective Ledoux as she was closing up her case and turning custody of the samples she collected to Cletus Kingman for keeping overnight and transport the next day to Crime Lab in Baton Rouge. "You look exhausted," Landry said. "Can I buy you a beer? There's a little place in town the crew here likes to hang out at. It will give me a chance to pick your brain. You game?" "I was born game, Sheriff," she said. "Why not?" Corner of Main and Lafitte," he told her. "On second thought, meet me at the Sheriff's Department on Main. Park around the side off the street. I don't want anything happening to that car in my town. I'd never forgive myself. I'll take you and bring you back. I'll meet you there." Landry pulled into the side lot at the department, but didn't go inside. The twilight was washed by a cool breeze blowing in from the south where a few thunderclouds were building. He leaned against the side of the car and placed his palms atop the front fender and lifted himself to a perch on the front of the car. Traffic on Main Street was light, and he closed his eyes and listened to the sounds of his town. Somewhere in the distance, dogs barked at the people passing by. A few early crickets were warming up. An occasional bit of music floated to him when someone went into the cafe across the street. It was a peaceful sound of the life in a small town. Moments like this made him glad he'd come home to find himself. The sounds were the same almost every other night, but he had the feeling that Loquet had changed forever. The full weight of what happened before dawn had not hit the town. Not yet. It would. He wasn't sure when or just how, but it would. And when it did, everything would change. Everything would wear the scar of what happened to Delmar Rousseau. The deep, throaty sound of a powerful engine and crunch of gravel under tires brought him out of his reverie. Jazz's car pulled up next to his. He jumped down from his seat to meet her. It's not so stylish," he said, holding a door to his car for her, "but it will get us there." "Well, thank you, Sheriff," she said and slipped onto the seat. And when they got to the sandbar, he hurried to open her door, but only half succeeded. He did better with the door to the bar. "Courteous and a gentleman," she said. "You don't have to open doors for me." My mother will be displeased with me," he told her. "But if it offends you, I will." No, she broke in. "You go right ahead. Your mother must be proud of you." "I hope so." He glanced away. "She died 2 years ago." "Oh, I'm sorry," Jazz said. "I didn't mean to." It's okay." It was his turn to interrupt. "As long as her lessons live, so does she. Please, call me Ed." "You are a strange man, Ed," she said, but in a nice way. Landry made introductions and Jazz settled into the off-duty banter of men and women who were more than co-workers. The television above the bar was tuned into the evening news, and thankfully John's lengthy dissertation had shriveled away into a 90-second soundbite by the time it reached the screen. "So, tell me," Landry said as the camera left John's face. "Who or what do you think killed Delmar? We didn't find a weapon. Could an unarmed man even do that?" "No way," Jazz said. "I'll wait on the ME's report, but the wounds on the neck look like tears. Almost like claws or hooks of some kind." "Hooks, huh? It just doesn't make sense." "Yeah. The guy answers the door and bam! Somebody takes his head off. It doesn't make sense. And why hide his head? Does he have any enemies?" "He's practically a hermit," Landry said. "He goes to work and home. As far as I know, that's it." "That's crazy," she said. "The only one with an explanation that fits is that old man on television." "Oh, don't look at me like that. I'm still on my first beer." Landry glanced at the empties on the table to make sure before ordering another round. The meeting broke up around 11. Landry took Jazz back to her car. "Thanks for the beer and invitation," Jazz said. "You have a great bunch of people working with you. But if it's all the same to you, I hope we don't meet again anytime soon." "Yeah, same here," he said. He watched her drive away and glanced up at the pale moon shining down on him, gave a bewildering shrug and drove himself home. Landry passed the morning reading over reports submitted by his deputies. The stack had been growing for several days, and it was time to clear the backlog. Jazz said she hoped she would not see him or his town again soon. He had a feeling she was going to be disappointed. Something in the brutality of the attack on Delmar told him that the killer would strike again. Later that afternoon, Jerry delivered the ME's preliminary report, dropping it onto Landry's desk before falling into one of the chairs. Landry found nothing shocking in the report. and there would be toxicity tests and tissue slides run. Neither of those held out much promise. And they could get lucky and get DNA, but that was going to take time and cooperation from the state lab in Baton Rouge, neither of which cared about his investigation. "Hell of a way to spend my day off," he said. Just think of all the overtime pay," Landry replied. "Haha, since when?" "I think it's time for it," Landry told him. "First murder in memory deserves the first overtime in memory, don't you think?" "Hell yeah," Jerry's face brightened. "About damn time." "So what do you think? About Delmar, that is. Who done it?" Jerry looked at his boss and quietly shook his head. "I can't believe a person could do something like that. Doc says the neck was too ragged to be cut with an axe or a saw. More like it was ripped off. I mean, who the hell could do that?" "Yeah." Landry let a slow breath follow the word. "More to the point, who in Lockett could do it or would do it? I don't think a head-hunting stranger just stopped by in Delmar's as he was passing through." "Well," Jerry said, "I'm going to leave you to ponder that alone. This old boy is dragging himself off to bed." Landry gave him a nod and a weak wave of his hand. Landry found the walls of his office closing in on him. Grabbing a cup of coffee from the pot in the deputy's common room, he waved to Freddie sitting at dispatch and stepped outside onto the steps leading from Main Street up to the sheriff's office entrance. Cletus Kingman, Landry's newest deputy, was climbing into his car with the autopsy and crime scene samples Doc and Jazz Ledoux had collected on his way to the lab in Baton Rouge. Twilight was edging into the dark when Landry decided to call it a day. He returned to his office to gather his hat and keys before retracing his steps out front to where his car was parked. Exhausted after nearly 40 hours with next to no sleep, he started for home. And despite the allure of his waiting bed, he somehow missed his turn and instead ended up parked in front of 439 Pierre Street. He crawled out of his cruiser and planted his butt against the grill and stared at a vacant house that loomed so large in his mind. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered on the gentle breeze blowing in off the bayou. The warm air and the canopy of the stars was a slave on the uncertainty of the day. Propped against the Crown Vic, he studied the scene and listened to the night gathering around him. In Delmar's side yard, a pair of frogs picked up the beat of the ticking of his engine as it called and began to sing along. 1,000 crickets joined in on the second verse and fireflies danced to the music. Delmar's blood had been hosed away, but Landry could still make out the stain, black as ink in the moonlight. And there was a story written on that porch. He wished his reading skills were sharper, more practiced. This kind of thing simply didn't happen in Bonaire Parish. At least, not until now. "It's a rougarou." Landry jumped like he'd been hit by a cattle prod. His heart skipped a couple of beats and his feet tangled themselves in each other. He nearly fell from his perch. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," Landry said when he could breathe again. "John, you scared the living hell out of me." "It's a rougarou. It's a rougarou." Old John smiled and pointed up at the moon. "Yep, it's a rougarou, sure enough." "No, it's not," Landry said. "And I want you to quit saying that. God, all I need is a bunch of gun-toting Cajuns crawling all over the parish hunting for werewolves." "That'd be something right there," John told him with a laugh and came over to lean next to Landry. "But just remember, old John told you so." The two men sat together, staring at the empty house in silence as the night stretched out before them. Landry chuckled to himself. This was the way men did it, the way they problem-solved. Women always wanted to talk about it, get their feelings out there. Men were different. They thrived on the quiet tumult in their own head. The frogs had moved on, tired of their song, but the crickets were still in the mood to sing. "John, what are you doing in town this time of night?" Landry broke the stillness. "'Tain't safe out there," John flipped his head towards the bayou. "The Rougarou." Landry thought about it for a moment before deciding to point out the obvious. "John," Landry slipped into his good old boy voice, "that'll make a lick of sense. If there was a Rougarou, and I ain't saying there is, mind you, and if there was a Rougarou that killed Delmar, and I ain't saying it was, that means the Rougarou is here in town, not out there in the bayou. You'd be safer at home than sitting here in town." "Oh, yeah?" John sounded startled by the revelation. "I didn't think of it like that. I'll just be going on home now." He patted the sheriff on the shoulder and walked away. Landry slowly shook his head and chuckled to himself once more as he watched the old man trotter down the deserted street. Maybe he's right, Landry thought. Why not a monster? He knew it was wishful thinking. Only another man could slaughter a harmless soul like Delmar Rousseau. Man was the only real monster. "John, wait up," he called after the old man. "I'll give you a ride." Bayou Moon. Chapter 3. Let's get straight into that. Landry watched the old man shamble across the overgrown yard by the headlights of his cruiser and mount the bare wood steps turned grey by the weather to the decaying house he called home. John St. Pierre was an old man when Landry was in kindergarten. The house where he lived was a recent addition as far as the life of John St. Pierre went. Landry remembered the cypress log cabin that this one replaced years ago. He laughed to himself at the memory of Tommy Fontenot screaming like his hair was on fire as he ran past the 5th grade version of Ed Landry on this very road. And Tommy and a couple of others had tried to trip over John's outhouse and got a double-barrel blast of birdshot sent over their heads for their effort. Old John's outhouse was probably still untouched to this day. He turned the car around and steered it back towards town. This stretch of Black Bayou Road was a lonely place after dark. The only other structure for a quarter mile was Frank Bass Fish Camp, the lights visible from the road when the place was occupied. A deer jumped from the scrub into Landry's path just as his eyes returned to the roadway. He slammed onto the brakes, fishtailing in the gravel. He steered into the slide and brought the cruiser under control while cursing to himself for such a stupid stunt. In the recesses of his mind, a voice whispered to him about the dangers of acting on first instincts. This time, he arrived at home as planned. He grabbed a beer from the refrigerator, making a mental note to resupply the first chance he got. He dropped down in his chair, pulled off his boots. Glad to be done for the day, he settled back to savour a bit of dark, smooth liquid. He woke up 2 hours later, the right side of his cheek aching, and the still half-full bottle of beer warm. He stripped off his uniform, dropping clothes where they fell on his way to bed. The alarm screaming in Landry's ear was merciless. The number of times Delmar Rousseau's headless body had flashed across his mind meant nothing to the electric slave driver. The alarm had one job to do, and by God, it was going to do it until Landry got his ass up. It was 7 o'clock, and there were people to serve and protect out there. Landry gave in and slapped the alarm clock and swung his legs out and over the edge of the bed. The wood floor was cool beneath his bare feet. He scrubbed his face with his hands, chasing away the lingering sleep from his eyes, and took in a deep breath of morning air, blew it out and started for the bathroom. The hot water of the shower melted away the stress that his shoulders had tied into knots and banished the still aching crick in his neck. He steadily bumped the hot water faucet to the left, standing under the scalding spray until, at last, the water heater surrendered and the water began to cool. He dried quickly before wrapping the towel around his waist and abandoning the steam-filled bath in favour of his bedroom, where he stood absently gazing at the uniforms hanging in his closet. As he looked at the row of khaki uniforms hanging there, it seemed like a good time to retire and ditch uniforms altogether. except for the 4 years in college he had worn one or another uniform since he was 18. "Ah, hell," he said as he reached for the shirt. Dressed, he greeted a sink full of dishes with a shrug on his way out the door. One more day wasn't going to hurt anything. And minutes later, he pulled up to the Bayou Cafe and ambled inside. Landry dropped down at his usual place at the counter. Maury met him with a steaming cup of coffee, which he slid silently in front of Landry and backed away. Halfway through his first cup of strong black coffee, a sensible connection to reality was made, and Ed Landry, Sheriff of Bonaire Parish, was open for business. Although he had heard it all before, he waved Maury over. "Morning," Landry said. "Now that you slept on it, do you know of anybody that was having trouble with Delmar?" "What? No," Maury said. "They only say why that Delmar don't make enough beignets. Father Jean came in 3 days ago, asked Delmar why he not go to church. Well, that's all. Besides all that, who's sleeping anymore? Not me. Looks like not you too." "Yeah, you're right there, Maury." Landry looked around the cafe. "I cannot for the life of me believe anyone would do that to Delmar." Maybe old John is right," Maury said. "Maybe it is a monster. Don't you go getting all crazy on me too." "You know me better than that, Sheriff, but still, this is crazy business we got here." "Right again," Landry told him. "What's good for breakfast today?" "Hey," Maury spread his arms wide. "Everything I make is good." Landry ordered a ham and egg biscuit and washed it down with a second cup of coffee before grabbing a third cup to go. He didn't have far to go. The sheriff's office was just across the street. Landry took time to gaze up at the soft pale blue sky laced with wisps of high clouds. A hint of a breeze rippled through the pines and was carried along Main Street, whispering that spring was here. Landry took the steps from the sidewalk to his office door 2 at a time. He pushed his way inside and waved at Freddie, sitting at dispatch, hung up his hat and was about to sit at his desk when he realized he was not alone. Behind the door was a tall, lanky man with a shock of coal-black hair above a large hawk-like nose and black-framed glasses. Next to him was a kid of no more than 17. The kid, around 6'5" and 250 pounds, wore a battered green field jacket and an Air Force patch over one breast and a name over the other. The kid's face was, vaguely familiar. Landry was sure it did not belong in Loquette, but the name on the jacket did. So did the black-haired man with him. Landry walked around the desk and held out his hand. "Frank, how you doing?" Tolerable, I suppose," the stranger said. "This is my nephew, Roger." "Richard's boy?" Landry asked. Frank gave him a quick nod. "Y'all sit down." Landry pointed at the chairs in the front desk. "How can I help you?" Landry noticed that young Roger's left knee was bouncing like it was turbocharged. His eyes flitted about the room and his hands couldn't seem to decide where they wanted to be. "So, Roger," Landry tried to put the boy at ease. "I knew your daddy, and he was a fine man." "Yes, sir," Roger said. His knee slowed a little. "What is it I can do for y'all?" Frank glanced over at the boy, pointed at the sheriff and nodded. Landry leaned forward, waiting for the kid to say what was on his mind. Roger looked back over his shoulder and saw that the door was closed and then cleared his throat. "I think I saw who killed that man yesterday," Roger blurted out. "What did you say?" Landry asked, though he had heard perfectly. "Just a minute." Landry reached into the knee drawer of his desk and pulled out an ancient tape recorder. "A recorder," he explained to the baffled boy. "Frank, if this is going to be about Delmar's death, I need to record what is said. Any objections?" Frank shook his head. Landry switched the recorder on and entered the dates and the names of those present. "Okay, Roger." He turned his face up to meet the boy's eyes. "Tell me what you saw." I think I think I saw who killed that man who works at the cafe, Roger repeated. You think you saw? Landry looked at Roger, then Frank and back. What makes you think so? Roger got up and retrieved the backpack he'd left by the door. He slowly walked back to the chair, dropped the backpack on the seat and opened the zipper compartment. Frank leaned forward and stretched his arm across the backpack. I told the boy you wouldn't arrest him, he said. I can't promise you that, Frank, Landry said. And you shouldn't have either, first off. I have no idea what's in that backpack or what's involved here. Next, I have a duty to do here. I will tell you this. I will cut the kid all the slack I can. Good enough? And Frank nodded at Roger. Well, the night before last, we were out at Uncle Frank's camp, Roger began. It was kind of foggy on towards the morning. Anyway, we heard something snapping twigs and crashing through the brush on the other bank. Jeff shined his light that way to see what it was. What's Jeff's last name? Dunno. It was me, him and John. You know, just hanging out. And did you see? Landry asked when the kid seemed to run out of gas. It's hard to say. Now, why is that? Landry asked. Either you saw something or you didn't. Which is it? Did you see something and did the others see it too? Yes, sir, Roger said. It's just that I don't know what it was. It looked like a man, only he was wearing a mask. A mask? Uh-huh. I mean, yes, sir. Yes, sir, a mask. Look up here, Roger. Landry tapped the corner of his eye. What kind of mask? I can't rightly say, Roger said. It had a lot of hair. Maybe a dog or a wolf, I don't know. When Jeff's light hit him, he was crouched down by the bank. And then he stood up and just stood there, looking right at us for a few seconds. Did I say he was naked? Anyway, he was naked and covered with something dark. Blood, I reckon. He looked right at us, and after about maybe 30 seconds or so, he ran off into the trees. When it got full light, we took a boat across the bayou and we found this. Roger reached down and pulled a blood-covered bundle from the backpack. Landry held both palms up in Roger's direction. Whoa, whoa, Landry shouted. You hold it right there. Don't move. The sheriff hurried around the desk and stuck his head out the door. Jackson, get in here, he shouted and turned back to the boy. Roger, very slowly, put that down on the desk and back away from it. I didn't do anything, I swear, Roger said. I just found it. I believe you, Landry said. Now just do what I asked. Deputy Jackson came through the door, barely avoiding a collision with Roger as he backed away. Jackson looked around at the boy, opened his mouth to ask what was needed, and then saw the bloody object on Landry's desk and retreated. He returned moments later with gloves and evidence bags. Landry looked at the shape of the blood-covered cloth on his desk and knew what he was going to find when it was unwrapped. Procedure trumped the growing knot in his belly and the chill running through him. And Freddie, summoned from his dispatcher seat by Jackson, appeared with a camera and slipped between Landry and his deputy as they were putting on gloves. He snapped 4 pictures of the thing on his desk and then stepped away. Oh shit, Sheriff, Jackson groaned as he pulled back the cloth. Landry swore under his breath as the face of Delmar's dog Pepe was pulled free of the rags that covered him. Jackson spread the cloth flat onto the desk under the dog's mangled body. Damn, looks like he was chewed by a lynx or something, Jackson said. Or a wolf, Frank said, peering over Landry's shoulder. Pictures taken, Pepe's bloody body was carefully lowered into a bag and tagged as evidence by the deputy as Landry watched. The body secure, Landry turned his attention to the backpack. The inside compartment was covered with blood from what appeared to be a full set of equally bloody clothes. When Deputy Jackson finished with the shirt, he tagged into evidence a pair of socks, underwear and jeans, as Landry removed them from the backpack. "Is this where the clothes were when you found them?" Landry asked. "No, sir," Roger told him. "They were scattered on the bank. We wrapped up the dog and stuffed them down in a pack. We thought you would want to see them." "Well, son, you're right there," Landry said. "But I really would have wanted to see them where you found them. Tell me something. You said the man you saw was naked? Was there blood on the clothes before you put them in the backpack?" "No, sir." Roger's voice fell with his head. "Guess we screwed everything up, Sheriff." "You complicated things, but don't kick yourself over it. You boys aren't police officers, but damn, don't y'all watch CSI?" "We don't have cable, Sheriff." "I forget I said it," Landry said with a chuckle. The clothes from the backpack were far too small to fit Roger Bass, but just to be sure, Landry did a quick inspection of Roger's body and showed no sign of trauma. In all probability, the blood belonged only to Pepe, but the final word would have to wait for the state crime lab. Jackson carried the sealed evidence from the room. The sheriff motioned for Roger and Frank to sit and resumed his seat. Landry rested his elbows on the desk and lowered his head into his hands, rubbing his chin while his eyes scrutinized Roger. "Y'all were drinking?" Landry said. "That's why you were worried about being arrested?" Yes, sir," Roger said. "Frank, what's going on here?" Landry asked. Frank Bass slowly shook his head. "I don't know, Ed. The boy has been in trouble since his daddy died. His mama sent him here hoping it would help straighten him out. I thought it was working. Now, there's this." Landry leaned across the desk and pointed a finger at the boy. "You have a right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand the rights I have just told you? And with these rights in mind, do you wish to speak to me?" Tears blossomed at the corners of Roger's eyes, and he swallowed hard and slowly nodded. The boy's uncle was about to intervene when Landry cut him off with a raised hand. "Now you listen to me, Roger." Landry's voice was cold still. "If you're involved in this in any way, you best heed the advice and get a lawyer. Are you sure you understand?" "Yes, sir, Sheriff." Roger's tears started down his face. "I swear I didn't do anything but find them clothes." "Do you understand, Frank?" Landry turned on the uncle. "You want a lawyer? Are you arresting the boy?" "No," Landry said. "He gets a free pass on the drinking. That's just kids being kids. I just don't want to find out later he's involved and have some jackass lawyer moaning now how he wasn't read his rights." Roger and Frank heaved united sighs and sank back into their chairs. "Now," Landry said, "who exactly is we?" Three hours later, the interviews with Roger and his two companions, Jeff and John Donne, completed. Landry felt like a ton of bricks had been dropped upon him. The questioning went on as expected, and he was looking for a white male, undermined age, medium height and thin build, and a hairy mask. Well, that didn't narrow the fields down by much. Hell, not at all as far as Landry was concerned. He needed coffee. Well, there was a pot in the common office, and he headed for it. He held the pot up to the light, and its contents were black as ink, thick as syrup, and smelled a bit scorched. And he poured a cup. Freddie pointed at the steaming cup in his boss's hand. "I wouldn't drink that, boss. That's got to be toxic by now." "Invigorating is the word," Landry said after a quick sip. "You know, Freddie, if you'd leave that frou-frou coffee you drink alone, you might grow facial hair someday." And Freddie was saved from further comment by the arrival of Jerry Wills. Landry motioned for Jerry to follow him to his office, Landry propped his boots on the corner of his desk and leaned back to enjoy his coffee. He filled the deputy in on his talk with Roger Bass. Roger didn't strike him as a killer, and nor did his drinking buddies, Jeff and John Donnay. But he told Jerry a few extra eyes on the boys couldn't hurt things. "So the stories jive?" Jerry said. "What now?" "Well, they told the truth and nothing but the truth," he told the deputy. "No crime there. What we need from them now is the whole truth." "You think those three are holding out on us?" "Without a doubt. They were vague about the face, and they were sure about the bird tattoo on his shoulder, but got real dumb about the face. How do you see a man's shoulder and not get a hint of his face? I don't buy the whole hairy mask crap." "Well, maybe they didn't recognize who it was." Could be. I doubt it, but could be. One thing I'm sure of, they did see his face, and they're protecting someone." "I don't get that feeling. I think that they are scared." Bayou Moon, Chapter 4. Let's get straight into that. After sending Jerry home with orders to get some sleep before he reported in on night shift, Landry left his office in search of fresh coffee. Freddie Bimmel was sitting at the dispatch desk. Landry wandered over, pouring himself a cup. Landry exercised a laissez-faire style in the day-to-day operations of the department. Scheduling was left largely to the officers, with immediate oversight in Jerry's hands. Landry took personal control of training officers and delegated mostly everything else to men he certified. Louisiana had a state training course for law enforcement. It was good, but not good enough for Ed Landry. Training at the Bonaire Parish Sheriff Department was his own brand of hell on wheels. Once a man passed the sheriff's muster, he was trusted to do his job with minimal supervision. I had made for a sound force, but Landry seldom knew or cared who was working at any particular time. "Who's on patrol right now?" he asked Freddie. "That will be Cletus and Harlan. Do you need something, boss?" "I have Cletus meet me out of Frank Bass's fishing camp in about 20 minutes, Landry said. "I'm headed there now, but he need not hurry." And Freddie was on the radio to Cletus as Landry went out the door. The pavement on Black Bayou Road ended about a mile from town, but it was well maintained. Many of the citizens of Lockett had fishing camps scattered around along the bayou. Red Crenshaw did a good business running a combination of alligator farms, Cajun eatery, and hosting alligator tours out that way. And he served a little liquid refreshment, the kind taxed by state, but kept it discreet. Red was buddies with a few of the old boys running the road department, and they saw to it that Black Bayou Road was kept up for the tourists, or at least as far as Red's place. 15 minutes later, he pulled off the road onto the drive to Frank's fish camp. The boat was tied up where Frank said it would be, and he had gotten permission to use it to cross the bayou. Meanwhile, he decided to have a look around before Cletus arrived. Cletus Kingman was a newcomer to Bonaire Parish. His parents moved to nearby Bayou Vista in the 70s from up north. What brought them all that way from Shreveport to Bonaire Parish, nobody seemed to know for sure. Cletus did a hitch in the Navy after graduating from high school. He had enough of the Gulf, cashed out of Uncle Sam's service, and ended up in Lockett, close enough to visit his folks, but far enough away to be as free as he wanted to be. What Landry knew of a procession of young ladies through Cletus's life, it seemed a smart arrangement for the young man. Cletus had a good head on his shoulders, but Landry thought him a little gun-shy when it came to death and superstitions. This case was the test he needed. Landry found the ring of rock and scavenged garden blocks that held as the boys' fire. The scattered beer cans and half-burnt branches still stacked in the ring told him they left there in a hurry and were fortunate not to burn Frank's camp to cinders. Cletus pulled up behind Landry's cruiser and walked to meet him. Cletus was a few inches shorter than Landry's 6 feet and at least 20 pounds heavier, every ounce of it muscle. "Hey, Sheriff," he said with a wave. "What's up?" Some boys camped here the night before last. Found Delmar's dog over there." He pointed across the narrow bayou. "Frank said we can use his boat to go over and take a look." Landry noticed the start of a frown on his deputy's face that was quickly hidden at the mention of the dog, but said nothing. He would tread carefully. Guys with Cletus' background were good about hiding the lingering effects of PTSD, up to a point. If that was the case with Cletus, he wanted to know that point without pushing him past it. "The boys brought the dog's body into the office this morning," he told the deputy. "And there still may be something of value over there. I doubt it, but we have to look." Cletus gave him a nod of agreement and went to work on the knot that secured the boat to the small pier. Landry climbed aboard as his deputy fired up the trolling motor to power them across. The bayou was only about 30 yards across at that point. Landry glanced back at the camp. The far bank was close enough to the firing for the boys to have a good, clear look, and certainly close enough to make out some facial features or recognize a familiar face. Cletus jumped from the boat to solid ground, dragged it closer for the sheriff, and tied it to a cypress tree. Landry gave him a smile and a slow shake of his head that said he wasn't that old. The gesture did make him feel old, and also made him proud of the spirit, the sense of honour and manliness of his officers possessed. It had not rained since the murder, and the blood-covered grass at that spot Pepe was found was easy to find. The two men searched the area in ever-widening circles that yielded nothing until Cletus reached the bank. "Sheriff," he called, "come look at this." Cletus squatted down and patted the grass with the back of his hands, and Landry looked over his deputy's shoulder at the impression in the semi-dry ground. At first, it didn't look like anything but a depression in the earth. As Landry studied it, a shape began to come together. It was a footprint, a paw print to be more precise. The biggest damn paw print he'd ever seen in Bonaire Parish. "What is it, Sheriff? A dog?" "That will be the biggest damn dog in Louisiana," Landry said. "But, yeah, that's what it looks like." "You want me to come back and make a cast of it?" "Only if you want one for your own satisfaction," Landry said. "Molds and footprints don't mean a damn thing as far as evidence goes, unless there's a pattern on the sole. Well, let's head back." Landry parked in the area beside the department reserved for him and his deputies. His door opened to the intoxicating odour of seafood boiling in a huge pot across the street at the Bayou Cafe. His stomach rumbled to remind him he had not eaten since breakfast, nearly a lifetime ago. He was in no mood to resist the demands of his belly. He started for his usual seat at the counter and saw Christy Dulac alone in the corner booth and changed course. Christy was a willowy blonde with a short pixie cut that wrapped tightly around her delicate features, and she was dressed in a long green cotton blouse that flowed over her curves and a pair of casual slacks. And she divorced her no-good husband a year ago. He noticed the ring that lived on for several months was gone. Landry was not immune to her good looks, and he had considered to ask her out, but never quite got up the courage to ask her. "Hi, Christy," he said as he walked up to the booth. "I don't mean to sound forward, but may I join you?" A look he could not decipher crossed her face. Police business," he hurriedly added. "Sure, Sheriff." She smiled up at him and gestured toward the seat opposite her. "If this is uncomfortable," he said, looking quickly around the room. "Not at all." Her smile grew, and she chuckled at the flush that rose in his face. "I'm not under arrest, am I?" He liked her smile. No, nothing like that," he stammered. "I'm working on a case and thought, well, since you're the librarian, you might point me to a book." Her smile vanished for a moment before reappearing as a weak reflection of itself that left Landry wondering what he had said wrong. "Oh," she said. "What kind of book?"
Something on local folklore," he told her. "Something about the Rougarou legend."
Before she could answer, the waitress appeared at the table to take Landry's order.
"Oh, I'm going to the counter in a minute," he said.
"No, stay, it's fine," Christy said, her smile back. "I hate eating alone."
"If you're sure you don't mind," he said.
"Please."
"Okay, thanks," he agreed. "I'll have the crawfish boil. What is that you're drinking?"
"It's called North Coast de Red." Christy lifted her glass.
"I'll have a glass of that," he told the waitress.
"May I suggest a Rousse and Louis instead?" she asked.
Sure," Landry said. "Rousse and Louis it is."
"You don't drink wine, do you?" Christy asked with a laugh.
"I always meant to start," he said. "What gave me away?"
"Well, most people like white wine with crawfish and shrimp. So, tell me, why do you want a book on the Rougarou? I heard old John's interview on the news. You're not seriously considering there might be a Rougarou running loose in Loquet, are you?"
"I don't know what to think at this point," Landry said. "The world is full of things that can't be explained."
"But a Rougarou?"
"Or someone who thinks they might be one. Who knows? It won't hurt to be up on the story."
They parted an hour and a half later, and with a promise to meet at the library the next day. Landry watched her drive away and then strolled across the street feeling lighter than he had in days. It took a moment of searching his memory to recall the last time he had dinner with a woman, and then quickly reminded himself that this was not a date, it was business. Sure, it was. He pulled into his drive 5 minutes later, fumbled briefly with his key and went inside. After a quick shower, he dropped down onto the bed. Feeling that he would sleep tonight was immediately confirmed. The call came into dispatch at 11:30. The emergency tone on Landry's scanner and his phone rang simultaneously. Minutes later, Landry was speeding down Panther Creek Road towards Black Bayou and praying no one else was on the road. He hit the first pothole about a half a mile outside the city limits. The jolt rattled his teeth, but it didn't slow him down. The frequency and depth of the potholes rapidly multiplied until the asphalt transformed itself into a dirt washboard that forced him to back off the accelerator to stay on the road. Half a mile further, he turned sharp to the right onto a pair of ruts and ran up onto a rundown mobile home bathed in red and blue lights of his patrol car. A mangy red-bone hound greeted him with bared teeth and a menacing growl. Landry rolled down his window. The sound of the hammer of his revolver being pulled back and the appearance of its black snout looking down from the window of his cruiser convinced the dog to beat a hasty retreat to the safety under the front porch. Landry stepped from the cruiser and made his way to the porch. The wooden steps groaned under his weight, but held. He reached through the torn screen and gave the door his best. "This is the law!" Knock. The full dog barking from his hiding place was the only answer. Landry announced himself and eased the door open. His light shined over a field of jumbled, broken furniture. "Jeff, Sheriff Landry, y'all in here? Jeff?" Silence. Not crickets. Silence. Creeping, crawling silence as foreign to the bayou as a sangaroo cactus. "Jeff, you hear me? This is the sheriff. I'm coming inside." A bouncing pair of high beams lit the night behind him, and Jerry's cruiser swerved around Landry's and rocked to a halt in the yard. Silhouetted in the door by the headlights, Landry ducked inside the house and flattened himself against the living room wall. "Jerry, check around back," Landry shouted to the deputy without moving. Landry shined his light over the living room and kitchen. The place was a mess, but guessing at Jeff's tidiness, that did not necessarily mean the trouble his kinfolks imagined. He checked the hall, cleared the bedroom to his right, and worked his way through the trash piled in the hallway to the master bedroom. "Coming in," Jerry's voice announced from behind Landry. "Come ahead," the sheriff answered. The back door swung open, and Jerry followed the beam of light inside. He caught up to Landry outside the bedroom at the far end of the trailer. Landry pointed to a spot of blood in front of the door before trying the knob, and the door creaked open on its dry hinges. "Oh shit," Jerry said. Landry pulled the door closed and pointed to Jerry to back down the hall, and they made their way back to the porch without a word and took up seats on the front steps, while Jerry informed dispatch of what they had found. Landry put in a call to the coroner, Jazz Ledoux, and Doc Johnson. They were in for a long night trying to put together the pieces of Jeff Donney. Dr. Johnson's Cadillac rolled up in front of Jeff's house an hour later, followed closely by Chet Rawlins' hearse. Landry was surprised to see Jazz Ledoux climb out of Dr. Johnson's passenger door. They gathered their cases from the back seat and walked over to meet Landry. "Where's the body?" Dr. Johnson asked. "You know I'm getting too old for this, don't you?" "Back bedroom to the left. Jerry will show you," Landry told him and turned to his companion. "Detective Ledoux, I had a feeling we might be working together again before either of us was ready." "It's getting old already," she said. Jazz opened her kit and got into paper coveralls, gloves, and shoe covers. She snapped pictures of the damage in the outer rooms before making her way to the bedroom. "Damn," she said when she stepped into the doorway. "Yeah, there's some messy folks in this parish." The sun was coming up as Jeff Donney's body was making its final exit from his home. A rose-blush-coloured eastern sky, and the morning was still, the air heavy with a promise of coming heat. "Is it the same killer?" He asked more to make conversation than to gain information. "I'd say so," Jazz told him. "How about you, Doc?" "I don't think there could be much doubt about that. We'll do the work, but I'd say it's the same guy." "But there was no decapitation this time," Landry said. "No," Dr. Johnson said with a shake of his head. "It looks like this time the killer tore his heart out through his back." "He's staging the scenes and the murders," Landry told him. "He's sending us a message." "What is it?" Doc asked. "Damned if I know," Landry confessed. "But we better figure it out in a hurry. Nothing to do now but head back to town." "Sheriff Landry, come in." A pair of radios squawked in unison. "Sheriff, come in." Freddy's voice crackled again. Yeah, I'm coming," Landry said. He reached through the window for the radio. "Landry." "Sheriff, we need you back in town," Freddy stammered. "I'm heading that way now," Landry told him. "What is it?" "We have another one." "Where?" 675 Cotton Avenue. Cheryl's on scene. An ambulance has been called and she's requesting all units and the coroner. "Understood," he said. "The coroner's still here with me. I'll notify him and CSI. I'm on my way, and Jerry's right behind me." He waved at Dr. Johnson and Jazz Ledoux as they were pulling out behind the hearse. Dr. Johnson gave him an exasperated palms-up gesture and rolled down his window as Landry approached. "Just got a call," he told them, "requesting a coroner and all units. According to Freddy in dispatch, we have another murder. Y'all follow me." Landry recognized the address Freddy had relayed to him. That particular location, of itself, lent a shadow of doubt to the severity of the call. It was only the fact that Cheryl was on scene and asking for help that truly credence to the need. The home at 675 Cotton Avenue belonged to Rita Goodwin. Rita was the reigning queen of Bayou busybodies. She had spread enough manufactured bull manure to fertilize an entire parish, and Ed Landry's ability as sheriff was a frequent subject of her many, many conversations. Loath though he was to admit it, If ever there was a citizen of Lockett he figured to be a victim of murder, Rita was it. He pulled up into Rita's house to find Cheryl trying to shoo a half-dozen of Rita's neighbours off her front porch. And seated just outside the open front door was a pale-looking Minnie Bell Wheeler, a damp cloth draped over her forehead and fanning herself with a white handkerchief. And it was a clear case of vapours, a familiar condition among the older, genteel ladies of the bayou. She'd live. Landry ignored her and pushed his way to Cheryl's side. "All right," he said. "Every last one of y'all go home. This is a police investigation and I'll have anyone still here in 2 minutes arrested for obstructing justice. Now get!" Unfortunately, the daggers thrown his way only from the eyes of the crowd. Despite the angry looks and muttered grumbling, they complied and regrouped in Minnie Bell's yard next door, which suited Landry just fine. And Jerry, Doc Johnson, and Jazz Ledoux joined Landry and Cheryl on the porch. "Who's the ambulance for?" Landry asked. "Miss Minnie Bell," Cheryl said with a cant of her head in the older lady's direction. "Jerry," Landry ordered, "take Miss Wheeler to your car and make her comfortable until the ambulance arrives, would you?" "Oh, my gracious," Minnie Bell said as Jerry lent her a hand to stand, and somehow she found strength to walk to the waiting car. "What's the story?" Landry asked. "About 30 minutes ago," Cheryl began. "According to Miss Wheeler, she and Miss Goodwin had coffee together each morning. She knocked repeatedly and got no answer, so she called for a deputy. There was no answer to my knocks and shouts for Miss Rita, so I made entry." "How?" Landry interrupted. "I found a key. It was under the mat," Cheryl told him. "I made entry and found Miss Rita. I really didn't need to check for a pulse, but I did. And she was dead and looks like she had been that way for a while." "Miss Minnie Bell sneaked herself a peek and, well, you saw her. I called an ambulance." "Okay, let's have a look," Landry said and followed her inside. Rita lay sprawled face down on her living room floor in a pool of blood. Rita, like Jeff, had kept her head. Landry thanked God for small favours, very small favours. Her head was still attached but wickedly slewed to one side, and he could see the lower half of her face was ripped from the rest of her skull. He didn't have to look far for the missing parts. Her tongue and lower jaw rested at the top of the centre of Rita's ample backside. Well, Landry thought, the message of the staging is getting plainer. Someone was making a statement. Landry quickly looked over her body and took a few pictures of his own before standing aside and letting Dr. Johnson and Detective Ledoux do their jobs. He walked around the immediate scene, but he just didn't have the stomach for it at the moment. He backed slowly out of the room, trying not to disturb the scene any more than possible. When Dr. Johnson finally moved Rita to her back, it turned out Rita had no stomach for it either. Her abdomen was ripped from clavicle to groin. He had Jerry get a statement from Minnie Bell before ambulance took her away. He then called dispatch and ordered all hands, including reserves, to report in. Cletus Cameron was the first to arrive. Landry sent him to man the scene outside Rita's while he went next door to question Mamie Rue. Mamie was a 70-year-old widow with chronic insomnia and horrendous muscular degeneration. She insisted on making coffee for Landry before answering any questions. The sheriff, not one to refuse coffee, offered no resistance. 2 people were dead. If it was going to be a long time before anybody was taking a break again, why not get a cop? Well, he could. Neither Rita nor Jeff were going anywhere. "It was a god-awfulest racket," Mamie began. "At first I thought Miss Rita was caught between 2 dogs fighting. Her dog, Archie's his name, was barking like, 'Oh, get out!' And then Miss Rita started screaming, amid all the snarling and growling going on. I peeped out the door to see what was the matter, and Miss Rita's door was wide open. A minute later, a man came running out of the door. At least, I think it was a man. My eyes ain't what they used to be, you know. I could almost swear the man was carrying a dog on his shoulder. That's crazy talk, but that's what it looked like.
Which way did he go? Landry asked.
He ran right past my porch. Miss Mamie held out an arthritic finger, and went yonder way down the street.
So he ran underneath that streetlight out front of your house?
Yes, sir, Sheriff.
And you got a good look at him then? Landry asked.
Like I said, my eyes aren't so good anymore, but yes, sir, I'd say so.
Was he white, black, Hispanic?
I can't say. He had that dog on his shoulder. No, wait. He was white, yes. Sir, he was a white man. I remembered his legs were bare. Oh, come to think of it, Sheriff, I think he was naked. Yes, sir, he was naked. Oh, anyway, he was a white man with a black spot on his back.
A black spot? Landry asked. Could it have been a tattoo?
I reckon it must have been, Sheriff, Mamie said. If it was a tattoo, it was big. I couldn't make a design. Can I get you more coffee?
Landry hauled his dragging backside up onto the store at the counter at the Bayou Cafe. Maury hustled over to greet him. Judging by your look, I'm guessing beer, he said. You're guessing right, Landry said. I haven't eaten today. What's good? You know everything I make is good, Sheriff, Maury said and slid a cold bottle to Landry's way. Why'd you say you trust me? Sure, why not?
Whatever it is, make it two. Jazz Ledoux slid onto the stool beside him. Oh, and one of those too.
Maurice Fontaine, meet Detective Ledoux of the Morgan City Police. She's working the murders with us. Nice to meet you, Detective. He put a bottle of Guinness in front of her. I can get you a real beer if you want. The sheriff's the only person in town that drinks that stuff.
This is fine. Thanks.
Maurice shrugged and walked away, but returned less than a minute later with catfish, fries, slaw, and hush puppies.
You won't find anything that good in Morgan City, he said. I'm beginning to wonder if I'll ever see Morgan City again, she replied. What do you think, Sheriff?
Right now I'd like to see Morgan City. An hour later, Landry and Jazz stepped out of the deserted main street. Street lights cast cones of light on the empty sidewalks. The night was still around them. Landry thought he could feel the fear in the air as they walked across to his office. It's not usually like this, he said. It's a nice little town.
Can you blame them?
No, he said. I blame me.
What? You didn't cause this. She punched him in the shoulder with a laugh. Although I have seen you at every crime scene.
Yeah, I guess you're right, he said. But I feel responsible. At least responsible for not protecting them.
Look, forget about it tonight, Just told him. Go home and get some sleep.
You too, and pray this is over.
The next morning, Landry was beginning to put together a timeline of the night's events. According to the Emmy, Jeff Donnet had died around 9 the night before. Cause of death, tentatively, exsanguination from multiple slash wounds. He was dismembered post-mortem. His phone was found near the back door with his brother's number on the screen. And John had been the one to call the department asking for someone to check on his brother. Rita's death happened sometime just after midnight, and that meant she was killed when he and Jerry were out on the Panther Creek Road discovering Jeff's body. Or how likely was it that the killer had been at Rita's when he drove by, possibly waiting for him to pass before he killed her? He thought it too likely to be a coincidence. Landry called a meeting of his department for 10 that morning. Everyone had been released back to their regular shifts, but he asked everyone to attend. To quell the rumbling, he announced there would be also biscuits and gravy, and bayonets from the cafe for those present in the meeting. He was surprised to see Jazz Ledoux come through the doors at 9:45. I stayed at a motel on the highway, she explained. I like to drive, but not last night. I figured I'd stick close by. Maury and his cook arrived 10 minutes ahead of the start of the meeting, and they had to push their way through a knot of reporters crowded on the steps of the sheriff's office. 3 murders in a week had suddenly put Loquet on the map. The leaked details about the death of Delmar Rousseau made them front-page news. Placated with food, his 5 deputies and half-frozen reservists settled in to go over the case and plan for the next steps in the investigation. "We're going to keep this brief," Landry began. "It's been a tough few days. We all need a break that we're not likely to get soon. First, I want to introduce Detective Ledoux from the Morgan City Police. For those who haven't met her, she's our CSI on this, and y'all make her feel welcome. Next, as of now, overtime is authorized for all of you until this case is closed." "What about us?" Cheryl Steers asked. "Our reserve officers get paid for the hours you are on the job," Landry said. "Coordinate with Jerry and, for God's sake, keep your time up to date." "So, we're investigating it as one case?" Cletus asked. "I think it's a safe bet," Landry said. "The horrific nature of the murders and the staging of the scenes just about have to be the work of one person. And we can't rule it out, but God help us if there's more than one person in this parish capable of this." "What's the next move?" Jerry asked. "You keep your eyes open, especially at night. Encourage neighbors to check on each other. I want 1 patrol car in town after dark at all times. And to do that, we're going to need as many of the reservists as possible to step up. If we need to call someone in to answer a call elsewhere in the parish, do it. Call me if you have to. I still know how, you know." The laughter followed was good-natured play. They all knew Landry meant what he said. "Sheriff," Cheryl broke through the chuckles. "One of the reporters asked me about the condition of Delmar's body. I just thought you should know." "Damn," Landry growled. "I suppose it was bound to come out, and we can definitely count on Miss Mimi Bell to share her observations over town. I hope no one in this room is responsible for the word on Delmar. I don't believe that, and don't give me a reason to do so. Keep your mouth shut." "What about them?" Jerry pointed to the front door and the reporters beyond. "I'll tackle that when we are done," Landry said. "Who is in on this morning?" Matt Fontaine and Jessica Jesse, Panatu, slipped their hands up. Landry acknowledged them with a nod. "Jesse, I want you to concentrate on doing interviews in town. Matt, you hit Jeff's few neighbors and be primary calls out in the parish. Unless somebody has something else, we are done for now. Everyone, get your reports in before tomorrow. And Jerry, tell that bunch I'll be out to talk to them in 15 minutes. There better be a bayonet left back on that table too." The sole beignet on the platter may have been a victim of brutality. It was whole, but had definitely been manhandled. Landry snatched it up anyway, locked it into his teeth, and poured some coffee. And then retreated to his office while the others filed out. Jazz Ledoux followed him to his office. "You want me to go out there with you?" she offered. "No. Why would you put yourself through it? I don't have much to say anyway." "Okay," she said with a worried look across her face. "There is something about the case I wanted to tell you." "All right," he said, leaning forward on his desk. "Looks troubling, so I just shout it out." "Oh, I don't know if it's troubling," she admitted. "Just one more thing that doesn't make sense with this case. I have found a lot of hair at every one of the scenes. I called an old friend from college that works in a lab in Baton Rouge. Well, he says the hair I've sent him isn't exactly human, or at least not typically human. You see, human hair has continuous colour, which this does. However, in the samples the pigment is more concentrated at the centre. That's typical with animals." "Are you saying an animal did this?" "Oh, no. I mean that the samples are, well, odd." "Well, that's just swell." "I thought you might like it," she said, rising from her seat. Anyway, I'm headed home. Please, don't call me.
I'll do my best. Drive safe in that rocket of yours. When she was gone, Landry leaned back and put his feet up on the desk. The break was more about food, coffee, and moderating his mood that decided on what to tell the press outside. He ate slowly, savouring each bite and visualising himself floating in a pirogue over calm bayou water. His inner clock called him back to duty. He let his boots fall from the corner of his desk, grabbed his Stetson, and went out to the feeding frenzy that awaited. "Call Frank Bass," he told Freddie as he passed by. "I want to see him and Roger this morning. If they can't come in, find out where they are and going to be. It will be okay to hint that I'm getting tired of their ignorance." "My pleasure," Freddie said. Landry stepped out onto the wide concrete porch of the Bonaire Parish Sheriff's Department. He raised his hands for quiet before the press release could get started. "Okay," he said above the low murmur on the steps. "I want all of you to remember this is an ongoing investigation. I'm going to tell you what I can, which is not likely to be enough for you, but it's all you're going to get for now. I'll take a few questions, but I do have other things to do. 2 residents of the parish were killed last night in separate incidents. Jeff Donnay, 21, of Bonaire Parish, was discovered dead in his home on Panther Creek Road from multiple wounds. He died sometime earlier in the evening. We're waiting on the ME for a precise time of death. Officers of Bonaire Parish responded to a call just after midnight at the home of Rita Goodwin, 74, of Lockett. Miss Goodwin was also found dead of multiple wounds. Okay, questions? Miss Martin." "You said separate incidents. Do you believe the murders are unrelated?" "I didn't say murders at all," Landry pointed out. "But Dr. Johnson's preliminary report does classify them as homicides, so we are proceeding on that assumption. There's a similar mechanism of injury, but not conclusive proof of a single weapon or killer." "What was the mechanism of injury?" Ben DeLander of Morgan City Press asked. "What kind of weapon was used?" "Stab wounds, Ben. We have not recovered a weapon in either case so far." "So they are related?" Shelley Martin asked. "There have been 63 stabbings in Bonaire Parish so far this year," Landry said. "Not all of them were related, Miss Martin." "But only 3 deaths," Shelley counted. "All in Lockett, all in the last week. Have we got ourselves a serial killer loose?" "Just asking what everyone's thinking, Sheriff." "Speculation," Landry said. "Was Delmar Rousseau decapitated?" Liz Powell at Channel 4 asked before Landry could say more. "That's not speculation, is it?" "That's not something I can comment on at this time," Landry told her. "With a serial killer on the streets, what's being done to protect the citizens of the parish?" Ben DeLauder said. "To answer the serious part of your question," Landry said, "there will be at least a deputy on patrol within the city limits 24/7. As for your supposed serial killer, those are your words, not mine. There is no proof of that." Landry ignored the questions held at him from all sides. He held up his hands for quiet once more. He shook his head at the questions still flung in his direction, and eventually the noise died down. "That's it for now," he said. "I have to get back to work." "But Sheriff," Shelley Martin called out as he walked away, "the people, they have a right to know." "Miss Martin," he turned with a withering look, "the people certainly have a right to know. That's your job. They also have a right to be protected in their homes. That's my job. Now let me get to it." Roger Bass kept his eyes on top of the table in front of him, shifted in his seat and swallowed hard. A slow shake of his head was the only answer. "I can't, Sheriff," he said. Tears streamed down his cheeks. His fear looked genuine enough to Landry, but he knew people could get genuine looking when he catch them in on a lie. Landry continued to fix him with a stone-faced stare. "3 people are dead, boy," Landry growled. I damn well want answers.
Old John, he was right. The boy's words were barely a whisper.
Old John was right about what? Landry leaned closer, a puzzled look upon his face.
I'm scared to say, and you should know better, Roger lamented. You know, what old John said on television.
On television? What did he say on television? Quit playing games with me, boy. Don't answer that, son. Frank Bass breezed into the sheriff's office, chased by a worried Freddie Bimmel.
I tried to stop him, Freddie said.
Forget about it. Landry waved Freddie out of the office. Sheriff, the boy ain't saying no more, Frank declared. He's told you enough already. You're the lawman. You figure it out from here. I got 3 dead bodies, Frank, Landry said. Doesn't that mean anything to you?
Yes, sir. It means Roger ain't gonna be number 4. Frank tugged Roger to his feet.
Let's go, boy.
Landry sat staring at the open door without really seeing it. His mind was running old John's interview. On the 5th pass, John's words stuck.
I'll be damned, Landry said aloud.
They believe it. He jumped up from his chair, collected his hat and stalked into the common office.
Freddie, he said without stopping, and go into the library.
The library was an old frame house built at the end of World War II by the town as living quarters for Agnes Sample, Lockette's one and only schoolteacher. Agnes was well beyond middle age when she arrived, and when she died in 1960, the town had a new school and a course of teachers. The old house was rescued from destruction by the elementary school teachers and named Agnes Sample Public Library. Christy Dulac returned to Lockette after getting her degree at Southeastern Louisiana State and been a librarian ever since. Landry bounded up the steps and through the screen door. A large fan rotated in lazy circles overhead in the living room turned fiction section. Christy was seated behind a desk behind a wide counter. She ran a hand through her hair and met him at the counter. "You're a day late. I wasn't expecting you," she said. "After last night, that is. You look tired."
"I feel that way too," he said. "I think I'm going to need that book sooner than I expected."
"Really? Why is that?" She came around the table and motioned for him to follow. "If I'm allowed to ask."
"Do folks around here really believe in this sort of thing?" He dodged the question.
"You grew up here. What do you think?"
"I'm sorry for asking," he said with a smile. "I should have known the answer to that one."
"That's okay," she replied. Here's the one I wanted. And whatever's not in there, you can ask a few of the old-timers around town."
"Like John St. Pierre?"
"Exactly, like old John." She placed the book into his hand and looked up into his eyes. "Most myths have roots in a bit of truth, you know." Landry read the title of the book and smiled at her.
"Don't tell me you believe this stuff. Myths and Monsters of the Bayou? This is it, huh?" Landry asked. "Who is this Fallon Jackson fella?"
"You're the one reading about Rougarous," she taunted. "I think Fallon Jackson is a woman, though."
"I guess it does make for strange reading," he said with a laugh. "Oh, I don't have a library card."
Take it. Just bring it back before I have to come looking for you. I know where you live. Do you? Do you now?
Well, that's interesting.
Jerry Wills rapped on the sheriff's open door. Landry offered a quick wave and pushed back from the desk. Jerry pulled up a chair across from his boss. "Are you ever going to sleep again?" Jerry asked.
"It doesn't feel like it," Landry said. "How about you?"
"Sleep's overrated."
"Yeah."
"Sheriff," Jerry said. Landry looked at his deputy with a lift of his brow. "I've been thinking about what Roger said." Landry rolled his hand into a "go on" motion. "Well, I read this story once by this guy from Oklahoma where there was this monster. It lived in a mental hospital and came out at night to feed on the loonies. Of course, none of the doctors or nurses believed their stories about the monster lurking in the hospital.
They call it mass hysteria, delusions, hallucinations, anything but a monster. They called in the police, who didn't believe there was a monster either, but they definitely had murder, and so they dug around for some kind of clue or hiding place and found Zip. And then, one night, this nurse who started believing the stories hid out under a patient's bed. Damn if there wasn't a monster. About killed the nurse before a stakeout team got to the ward. In the end, the whole thing got hushed up. Well, as hushed as something like that gets, because we can't have people believing in monsters. "Are you saying we have a monster loose in Loquette?" Landry asked. "You sound like old John. You know he's got the folks believing there's a Rougarou stock on the streets. That's what Roger Bass thinks he saw." "I don't know what I'm saying," Jerry confessed. "I'm punchy, I guess. It's just we got 3 murders and no evidence." Landry swiveled around, the book in front of him, and pushed it towards Jerry. He looked at the picture on the page before scanning the article. "Yeah, so?" Jerry said. "Do you believe it?" "A Rougarou? No. Somebody wants to make folks think we have a Rougarou? Yes. It wouldn't be hard to do so. Some drawings in there aren't like the stuff you see about werewolves. All fur-covered, and the Rougarou only has a head of a wolf. Easy enough, right? And that's what Roger and his buddies saw. The same goes for Miss Mamie." "What about the wounds?" "Sharpen up some claws and make a set of gloves like the movie." "But why? Just to go around killing folks at random?" "I don't think it's random." "Okay, I'll bite," Jerry said with a chuckle. "What do a semi-reclusive baker, a college kid, and an elderly gossip have in common, other than they're all dead?" "And that, my dear Watson, is what we must find out. And I think I know what Roger Bass is holding back." "I was hoping to be Holmes," Jerry said. "What with my story about monsters and all." "Tell me then, Sherlock, what do you deduce from the staging of Miss Goodwin's body?" "Elementary. She's been talking out her ass." "About whom?" That's not as tricky as it seems. Somebody that Jeff's double-crossed." "Where'd you get that?" "When the pieces of Jeff were put back together, all of his injuries were inflicted from behind." "That's pretty thin, but I suppose you're right. How does Delmar fit in?" "Yeah, that's where I say it's time for me to get out of there." "Yeah, that's where I say it's time for me to get out there on the street. If you don't mind me saying so, you should go home and go to bed, Sheriff." An hour later, Landry decided to take his deputy's advice. He tucked his book under his arm, grabbed his hat, and pulled the door closed behind him. Camille Trent, working dispatch, returned his wave as he breezed past. "Don't call me," Landry said over his shoulder. "Night, Sheriff," Camille called after him. A familiar, hunched figure sat on the bench at the foot of the stairs. Landry thought it was just like the man to ignore all the warnings to stay off the streets at night. Old John scratched behind one ear as he looked up at the sheriff. "How are y'all?" John said with a wave and a smile. "John, what are you doing out here?" Landry asked. "I was just sitting here thinking about going home." "I bet you were," Landry said. "Come on, get in the car. I'll drive you home." "Well, that's mighty nice of you, Sheriff." John tried to lever himself up and tottered and flopped back onto the bench. Landry hooked an arm onto John's and helped him up. The old man wasn't as feeble as he generally let on, but Landry thought the hollows around the old man's eyes looked deeper than usual, and there was a definite tremble in the usually steady hands. Landry noticed a grimace when John lowered himself into the car. "John, are you feeling poorly?" Landry asked. "I could take you to that new urgent care up in Morgan City." "I just need to get home. Maybe have a little sip." "That stuff's going to kill you someday." "Doc Kruger says different." "How's that?" "I got cancer, Sheriff," John told him. "Doc says a month or maybe 2. I don't look so shocked. I've been around a long time. Maybe that Rougarou will get old John before the council does.
John, how many other folks around town do you think believe in this Rougarou of yours?
Damn near everyone, John said. You're from here? Don't you believe in the Rougarou?
No. But don't you think Frank Bass does?
I know he do, John said with a smile. Him and that boy come to see me the other day. They want to know how deep that Rougarou go. They want to know how to keep the Rougarou away.
Landry drove the rest of the way in silence. He dropped John off and watched him go inside before driving off, and feeling a little bit puzzled at the news that John's cancer hit him as hard as the slaughter surrounding him. Back at home, Landry settled into his chair with a bottle of Guinness and pried off his boots, and sleep felt miles away. He flipped through the 2 mindless talk shows and a hair regrowth infomercial before coming to a rest on an old episode of Forensic Files. A few sips into his beer, and he closed his eyes into the mellow voice of Peter Thomas and was instantly asleep. In the middle of the program's DNA analysis that carried over into his dreams, a nurse in blue scrubs wheeled a gurney carrying old John into an operating room where a surgical team waited. They transferred the old man onto the table and put a mask over his face, and just as the doctor made his incision, bells began to ring and alarms to squawk. "We're losing him," a voice announced. The doctors began doing CPR, and each compression sent blood flying from the fresh incision. Blood covered the doctors and nurses and dripped from the table. "That's it," the doctor said through his mask. "Time of death." Before he could get the words out, the doctor choked on something and clutched his throat. His eyes rolled back into soulless white orbs. A wild, undulating howl that dripped with despair poured from his lips. Landry's eyes flew open and the operating room disappeared. Forensic Files was back, but the howling continued. I was assented by the sound of tires squealing on the pavement. "That's real," he told himself. Landry kicked down the footrest and bolted for the window. He hit the floor and traction failed. His socks slid over the wooden floor, and for a moment his churning legs took him nowhere. He stumbled twice before reaching the window. He threw the window open and the volume doubled. Everywhere lights were popping on around the neighbourhood. The howling died while Landry struggled to put on his boots and slid again, and he ventured outside to investigate. Porches and sidewalks were crowded with people, and half of them armed. A few brave souls, brandishing shotguns and flashlights, searched between the houses. Landry herded everyone back inside without any casualties. "There was a dog, right, Sheriff?" Edouard Bevier asked. "Yeah, Ed," Landry said. "Somebody's dog got loose. I'll take care of it. You go and get back to bed." Sweeping his light over the nearby yards, Bevier ambled home. Landry continued to roam the neighbourhood. "What are you looking for?" he thought. "You know sure as hell that ain't no stray dog." Landry gave up his search and walked back home. As he turned onto his front porch, his eyes caught a crumpled Zinner. He played the beam of his flashlight over the flower bed, and what he found was anything but what he expected. It was a footprint, a human footprint with 1-inch claws. Wow, 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 wow. And another one. Wow, 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 wow. And another one. Wow. Absolutely chest pounding. What a riveting storyline that's unfolding. Wonderful, wonderful stuff there, Jack. I really can't wait to the end of the month where I'm going to add this one to my collection of favourite werewolf fictional books. A truly nerve-wracking and chilling storyline. Great stuff. Guys and girls, as ever, you know the drill. Please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag Team Fear? As I mentioned at the start of this, on the 5th of this month, Jack LaFontaine's book, This Story, was released on Amazon Books and is available for download or hardback and paperback copies. Of course, I'll leave the link to that in the comment box and also in the description box below. As ever guys, I hope you're all well and happy, and keeping focused and busy. And above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.